We are back now after the unfortunate events of last week Tuesday, the terrorist attack at 14 Riverside Drive where 21 people lost their lives and many more were injured. The government now has planned to arm guards to improve security. This was said by the Director General of the Private Security Regulatory Authority, Fazul Mohammed, and this will happen by July. There's been lots of reactions from this announcement, with many saying, no, we cannot arm security guards, and others saying that we need to vet all security guards before arming them. There are those who are saying that they must conduct military-like training for the guards before they are handed the rifles. Linus, what do you think? Should we arm our security guards? Because there are those who are saying if we had armed security guards at the entrance of the complex where the attack happened, maybe we'd have averted the crisis.
This suggestion is informed by frustration among the public about the nature and manner of attacks that Kenya has experienced for a while now. You look at how the terrorists walked into 14 Riverside, and all they had to do was to go past some unarmed guards in a small gate and rungu welding. It's so easy. You don't even have to use a gun against them. You just show them. You don't even have to shoot them. But of course they'll shoot them because they're looking for casualties. I think there's a sense of frustration that if these guards were armed, they would act as a first line of defense. And this is a good point that those making it putting across, because it's true. It could be a deterrent. There are countries that have used this. You go to a country like Uganda, and there is licensing of private guards. But more interestingly, in places that are considered very, very insecure, when people know that generally the environment is teeming with not just activity, but people with arms, it acts as a deterrent. There are places you cannot start thinking about snatching a purse or thinking about robbing a bank. But in Kenya, because everybody knows that it's a zero policy on armed guards, all installations are actually, except those guarded by armed policemen, are actually sitting ducks, and like it was with both Westgate and 14 Riverside.
Yeah. But there's a challenge.
Yes.
And this is a challenge that we must confront as a country. Who are these guards that we're talking about? What is the definition of a guard currently? It's somebody who stands in front of a door, holding a rungu, and even some of the checks, some of the security checks that they take people through are not necessarily checks. I mean, how many of these guards know what a bomb is, how it looks like, and when they see it, what do they do? So probably even before we come to the question of arming the guards, let's start with the question of recruitment, training, vetting. Let's start there. Once we have the right people, the right caliber, people with the right mindset, then you can now talk about arming them.
Just a piece of information, Francis. If you look at most or some of the private companies, and I'm talking about the middle level ones, they recruit very competent ex-policemen, ex-GSU, ex-military even. These are very well-trained people. Some actually leave the service to go and work for these private companies. But they'll go there and then they are not bearing guns. So it's not even an issue of training.
I think Joe, before you answer that, you spoke about something about the type of people that we employ as the guards, and you say they're competent. But do we ever look at the mental, do they undergo mental checkup? Because we've had instances of suicides within the disciplined forces. We've had cases of a policeman shooting his wife and children, and that is the
misuse of firearms,
exactly.
Basically.
So now we want to put these same firearms into the hands of security guards. Joe?
Yes, I think if you look at the debate, even for example in the US about gun control, it's never about whether guns are useful in terms of dealing with crime or terrorism and that sort of thing. The discussion usually is about who is that person who has the gun. That is why there's this whole standoff about background checks and making sure that we know who is going to purchase a firearm, we know who's going to use it, and we can account for it. And I think one of the things that we have to deal with in the country, which is where the concern would come, is that we are generally a country that is completely indisciplined. We don't like following rules, even where they are there. I mean, when people are in a queue, we will jump. When we are driving on the road, we will overlap. everything, corruption, all of these things. So in a sense,
but
we
nothing
are not...
orders us. Nothing orders us like the threat of force.
No, but this is the thing. Before that force is used, we'll actually have someone going somewhere to acquire a gun. And I think that before we get into this, we have to be completely sure about, one, someone raised something about who exactly is going to have these guns, but more importantly, that regulatory system that ensures that only the right people actually have those guns. Because right now, I mean, CS Matiang'i was complaining the other day when he disbanded that firearms licensing board, I think it was, because they discovered that there were people who had firearm certificates, but they had never gone
undeservedly.
Yeah, they had never gone through any vetting process and everything. I don't know whether that's completely sorted out. And there have also been instances where even the current police officers have been accused by people who say, well, you know, these people, some of them hire out their guns to criminals and that sort of thing. So I think it is very important that there is that deterrent in malls and everything, that those bad guys know that when I go to this it, I'll not just stroll in and start shooting people. There'll be someone from a window somewhere engaging and that sort of thing. But I think the flip side is that we need to be careful about that whole regulatory framework so that we get it right.
And Joe, you remember the first, you remember the, sorry Jamila, the first Inspector General of Police, he said, David Kimayo. Yeah, he said there is some good if guns will be in the hands of good guys. Because they'll actually help. And a lot of examples are being given about the responders. Some of them doing a fantastic job, not just recently in 14 Riverside, but also previously in Westgate. In Westgate. So those proposing, making a good point, only that, like Joe says, and I agree, what is the framework?
There are two things here, Francis, before you speak, about the same issue. Because currently we have about 500,000 security guards belonging to an estimated 1,000 private security firms. And of course, we're not going to arm 500,000 guards. We need to have a criteria. So we're going to look at rank, who is senior. Maybe we'll give that person a gun. And something that Joe also mentioned about Minister Matiang'i a couple of days ago speaking, and he said they're going to have cards. They're going to have a registration system for anyone who is holding a firearm in this country, so that in case we find a firearm somewhere, we're able to trace it back to the owner. Because they say they have instances of crime being committed and they find weapons and they're able to trace who these weapons belong to.
What if probably there were regulations, for example, have a standardized training curriculum or manual for these private security guards, number one. Number two, today if you see an officer in a red beret, you know clearly that's a GSU officer. If you see a police officer in a white beret, you know that's a traffic police officer. Why not come up maybe with almost a similar dress code for these security guards, such that you're able to know this is a private security guard. But also, remember, the private security guards are a very rich source of raw intelligence. Very rich source. These are the guys who guard buildings, they guard flats where people live. They can be able to tell Jamila comes home at a certain time, goes to work at a certain time, is visited by these kind of people, and so on and so forth. These are guys who can be able to give a very good profile, actually almost a detailed account of who lives here and their behavior. So this is also a rich avenue for the National Intelligence Service to tap into this raw intelligence kind of gathering. So basically, if you streamline, if as a country we streamline these private security guards and make sure that they are well trained, well vetted, disciplined, then arming them is not a problem. Remember, the National Youth Service produces recruits every other 6 months or 9 months. This is a very rich area to tap into it. But as long as you can be able to pay these private guards well, so that you're not paying somebody 7,000 shillings or 8,000 shillings and you're giving them a gun. That's a recipe for disaster.
And you're talking about intelligence. Before we go to our final topic, we also need to look at ourselves, because I mentioned this last week. Do we know our neighbors? We keep talking about the Nyumba Kumi initiative that I don't know did not take off as expected. Mushadha, I keep mentioning this. Yes, your neighborhood, where one of the suspects, Ali Gachuri, is said to have lived. He'd even, I think, some of the terror suspects had spent the night in his home, and people did not know much about them. I think for us also is to try and know who our neighbors are. Do you know your next door neighbor? Do you know
sometimes
who they are?
Sometimes it looks like a bother.
Yes.
For some people, they prefer their privacy. They don't want to interact so much with their neighbors. But I think it is necessary for people to know who is who lives where. In fact, more often than not, people meet in WhatsApp groups more than they meet in person.
Very true.
Yeah.
True.
So
True.
that is the unfortunate situation. Like that Ali Gishunge guy, people living in Gwango Estate say he was in that WhatsApp group. So he was a member of the group. He was a member of their neighborhood, but they didn't know him at a personal level.
In fact, they said he was just silent. He was quiet. He kept to himself, and that was it. That was all that they knew about him. Joseph, I think we need to cross borders now, don't we?
Oh yes, without a doubt. And we're talking about the Democratic Republic of Congo, peaceful transition of power, or shall I say democratic, some people would argue with that, transfer of power in 59 years. Felix Tshisekedi.
Yes.
Etienne was the father, right?
Yes.
Felix Tshisekedi taking over there as the new president after Joseph Kabila. An interesting development, Kaikai. President Uhuru Kenyatta, the only president to have attended this. That we can discuss in a minute, but a historic occasion all the same.
Historic and moving indeed, and watching it, was quite a moment, even for me personally.
You've covered this.
Yes, I covered the 7-nation war in the DRC that involved Zimbabwe, there was Angola, there was Namibia as well in there, there is
Uganda, Rwanda, South Africa.
Rwanda. All these nations were fighting in Congo, and I spent time with the Rwandan troops and also crossed over to the Ugandan troops. And at one time they fought in Kisangani, quite a contest of tough, who should control Kisangani. And I was there right in the middle of that fight. So I was actually pleasantly pleased that President Uhuru Kenyatta was the only one from the region that went in there. I do not know what we should expect by seeing President Museveni there, President Kagame as well. All these are nations that were involved, and they have quite a rough relationship with the DRC. So the absence is understandable. But back to the history, you look at that moment, and I think I mentioned this to you, Joe, earlier, that it's very interesting to see the cannons firing in the opposite direction in Congo to the 21-gun salute. These cannons have been firing at people. This is the first time I've seen guns being fired safely in the DRC. That itself was quite phenomenal. I think it's quite a moment for the Congo.
I saw tears of joy.
There were tears of joy, and I think it's because
during that inauguration of the new president. But also goes to show the potential for African nations that very many people don't seem to realize. Look at the sheer numbers. It's a rich market for Africa as a continent. African countries can trade with each other if there was peace, if there was development, if there was progress. But unfortunately, there seems to be foreign nations, or call them former colonizers, who seem to often take advantage of our inability to get our act right and take advantage of our numbers. If we were to do it, then probably we would be making the right steps. Look at the amount of minerals and oil resources that are in African countries, but we never seem to take advantage of it. If the African leadership got its act together, African leaders began talking to each other and thinking big, probably Africa would get to where it's supposed to be, taking advantage of the huge potential to develop and progress.
Jamila. And I think the new president, Felix Tshisekedi, he fell ill when he was giving his speech and he could not complete it. I hope he's okay. But one of the first things that he needs
Apparently he resumed.
He finished the speech. That's excellent, which means he's okay. But now, one of the first things he needs to do is to appoint a prime minister. And remember, he doesn't have many numbers in parliament. Kabila's supporters hold an overwhelming majority in parliament. So that's one of the first things he needs to appoint a prime minister. But we need to remember that this ceremony that happened today, there was the emotions, because this caps about 2 years of turmoil. This was after Kabila refused to step down, even after his constitutional limit had reached his term in office. And I think the fact that the last two presidential elections, I think 2006, 2011, which were won by Kabila, were marred by bloody clashes. Now, this one that happened on December 30th was generally peaceful. And I think this is a step in the right direction for this country. Remember, this is, I think, the first democratically elected president. I think since in how many years now? 15?
Since before the
Belgians left.
Yeah, and I think, Jamila, you mentioned the composition of government. The right thing for Felix Tshisekedi would be to form a government of national unity.
Grand coalition of sorts.
He should really go for a grand coalition of sorts, one that unites everybody, because it's a country that has still so many factors that can let it explode again. There are a lot of powerful people who are not allowed by the previous regime to even come home or contest the presidency. You're talking about Jean-Pierre Bemba, a very, very influential politician and an ICC suspect. I think has been cleared. You talk about Moise Katumbi. These are very powerful people who probably even had a chance of winning the presidency than
not
Felix
to mention Faluyu himself, who
and Faluyu
himself.
His coalition actually has 102 seats in the parliament.
Still claims that he won the election. But I think that it's a significant country in not just in the region but the whole of Africa, because I suspect personally that is the reason why the president of Kenya so it's necessary to go there, because this is potentially a great market for the people. I mean, DR Congo has over 80 million people.
Yeah.
It has mineral resources that are inestimable. It has gold, it has tin, it has tungsten, it has all manner of minerals that you can imagine, that a lot of it still remains unexploited. The estimates run into things like
billions,
like $24 trillion in estimates in terms of minerals, and look at the kind of potential that exists for Kenya to do business, for Kenyan professionals to go there in a stable DRC. I think there are a lot of jobs that people from this part of the world can do. Their human resource base is not that well developed because of years of instability. Yeah. So I think there is an opportunity there that Kenya can tap into. There is talk actually that they have been warming up to the East African community, in a sense trying to get membership, and imagine what that vast country could add to the region if that became a reality.
The untold story of this DRC's situation is that even the deal that culminated in the inauguration of President Felix today was crafted and hatched right here in Nairobi. So that should also, in one way or another, explain President Uhuru Kenyatta's presence there, and even Raila Odinga's presence there, as well as Kalonzo Musyoka's presence there. So Kenya, probably, you can clearly say, had a stake in what we saw today.
And finally, you know, one Kabila is going to become now a senator for life. This is a position that's reserved for former presidents under the constitution. So atabakia hapo hivyo, and he'll continue to influence things. Remember, it's called the Joint Front for Congo. It's a party that is pro-Kabila, has 337 members of parliament out of, I think, the 500 seats.
So he still controls.
So I think we will still hear a bit from Kabila.
Coalition would do it
but it's just a good thing that we are no longer talking about President Joseph Kabila.
And you had mentioned about the East African community. Look, it's really an attractive prospect. I don't think a lot of people do know that Kiswahili should be the third most spoken language.
Part of the commentary actually during the inauguration
was in Swahili.
So they were going between French, Lingala and Kiswahili.
They would fit so easily into the East African community. And I hope the delegation, big delegation by government today, President Uhuru Kenyatta being there, actually translates to converting that to business opportunities. And let's see things like Felix Tshisekedi paying the first foreign visit
to Kenya,
to Nairobi.
It would be quite interesting. I think we need to take this show home, as they say. And so let's start with my angle, which tonight we'll try to put on TV the spirit of an article I read the other day, written by my professional senior and friend, Macharia Gaido. His simple but profound observation was about the needlessly large number of no photography signs in this city. His article reminded me of a visit I once paid to the US city of Philadelphia. Now, those who know the history of the United States of America will tell you how important the city of Philadelphia is. This is literally where the USA as we know it today was founded. It is one of the most visited places in the US and has some of the most historically significant buildings and monuments. But guess what? You will not see a single sign telling you not to take photos. As a matter of fact, you're encouraged to take as many of them as you can. What's more, they even provide you with an interactive virtual tour of the place, which includes 25 panoramic 360-degree photos, a 3-minute 360-degree video, and videos and photos in virtual reality in what they call an immersive tour on a VR headset. But I suppose they can do this because America is so far that no terrorists can get there. I mean, why else would they open themselves up to that manner of prying? Don't they know groups like Al-Shabaab and Al-Qaeda and such other murderous outfits still exist? Well, let them come to Kenya where you can't take a photograph with Parliament in the background, all in the name of fighting terrorism. I'm talking about Parliament, not the military barracks in Langata or Lanet. Parliament. When we send we elected leaders to this iconic building, they represent us. So I'm really talking about a building that we only see in government and history and government books. Just a picture outside Parliament, never mind that detailed pictures of that very Parliament, including the layout of the chambers, are all over the internet. It just seems to me that the next recommendation might just be for us to drain out all the blood in our veins to avoid being bitten by mosquitoes. That's my angle tonight.
Talking about mosquitoes, there's another one that is also very important, and that's where my punchline is. It will be very brief. This year, a very important function will be taking place, that of the national census. In 2009, there were problems with the numbers. Hopefully, this time, the numbers will be right. If you have 10 children, hope they will all be counted, and they will not be imaginary. If you have one, he or she will be counted, and hopefully not imaginary. And then those numbers will be put into proper use for planning to ensure that the resources will come to you. However, there's a tendency for many Kenyans that you want to turn up to register as a voter, but you don't think it is important to be counted when the census guys come close to you. Yet, at the ballot, you will be electing somebody who will be taking charge of the resources that will be allocated to you as a result of the numbers coming from the population. So what is more important? Why don't you first support these enumerators to get the right data so that that right data comes to you in terms of resources allocated to you via that principle of population. So let's get it right without kupiga corner.
A report by Control of Budgets, Agnes Odhiambo, covering July to September 2018, has shown that 24 counties have not spent a penny on development, 0 shillings. There are among others Baringo, Garissa, Homa Bay, Isiolo, Kajiado, my county Kericho, Kisii, Kisumu, Lamu, Machakos, and Mombasa. The total funds available to the county governments during their period was 79.3 billion shillings out of the 450 billion in the county's budget. Now, the remaining 23 counties spent a paltry 3.51 billion shillings on development projects. The bulk of the money, get this, in these counties was spent on travel, staff salaries, and uncontrolled sitting allowances for MCAs. In Garissa, for instance, uncontrolled hiring of workers was the reason for the imbalance. Over 980 million shillings was spent on salaries, while 88 million was spent on operations and maintenance. In Wajir, they spent 620 million on salaries and 85 million to run offices. This despite allegations of corruption and misuse of public funds being leveled against Wajir County. Just yesterday, detectives from the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission raided the Wajir County government offices in an ongoing investigation. Now, this trend raises questions about the priorities of some of the county governments, with importance being given to luxuries, while the projects that would positively impact the lives of the people are ignored. The essence of devolution was to bring essential services closer to the people. Don't get me wrong, things have greatly improved in many places across this country. However, with this latest report, one would wonder if what we now have is devolution of bad manners. That's my memo.
My final word tonight is a tribute to what we should all call the Kenyan spirit. Folks, there is something persistently good about us. The force of good is consistently resilient within us. There is something pure about the Kenyan spirit. Yes, even in the midst of strong negative forces. Let me point out one instance that some may take for granted. Social networking tools, including mobile phone texting groups, have become some of the most effective communal helplines. This week alone, a young girl, a child of a struggling single mother, was able to join secondary school because someone learned of her plight and posted it on the social networking group that in turn raised school fees and sent the girl to school within no time. A small story that surely resonates with all of us and is without doubt replicated all over the country in mobile phone groups that includes even yours. This is the true Kenyan spirit. It is the offshoot of the same spirit that saw communities getting together to raise money to build schools or to send students overseas for further education. That is the same Kenyan spirit that celebrates every university graduation in style. When you see a matatu decorated with banana leaves, a village somewhere is celebrating one more university degree. Medical and funeral fundraisers remain an undying illustration of the Kenyan spirit. Of course, there have been a few conmen along the way, as must be the evil that must be overcome in doing good. Keep the Kenyan spirit alive. Let us send those needy children to school. The Kenyan spirit is about the triumph of right over wrong and good over evil. Keep doing good. Good night.
What a nice way to end the show. And Yvonne, we miss you. Wish you all the best. We hope to see you next week. I missed you. I really, really did.
We missed you.
Have a good
You
night
just
and
felt
thank
lonely
you.
as well.
Yeah. Thank you and good night.
Good night.